In the summer of 1942, as the Eastern Front burned under the clash of two vast armies, German soldiers stationed near the front began reporting a sound, soft, faint, like a whisper of wind passing through old trees. It came most often just before the blackness of night lifted, in that thin blue-gray hour when exhausted men were least alert. A flutter, a sigh of canvas, and then the sky erupted in flames. The Germans would later describe it as the sound of witches riding on broomsticks. Their commanders dismissed the reports at first, believing them to be nerves and fatigue. But soon, entire encampments were burning to the ground. Ammunition depots burst into fireballs. Command posts were erased in seconds. Only then did the officers begin to understand. Something was hunting them, and it was coming every night. These were not spirits. They were not phantoms. They were young Soviet women, many of them barely out of school, flying wooden biplanes, aircraft so slow and fragile that a single tracer round could tear through the fuselage. And yet, they could not be stopped. The Germans gave them their name out of fear and hatred, Die Nachthexen, the Night Witches. When the German invasion began in June 1941, the Soviet Union was caught unprepared. Cities fell, factories burned, and millions were pushed eastward. The Red Army was desperate for aviators, but most of those trained in flying were men, and many had already been killed. But one woman refused to let the war remain a battle fought only by men. Her name was Marina Raskova. Before the war, Raskova had been a national celebrity. She was the Soviet Union's version of Amelia Earhart, a record-setting aviator, an icon of courage, and one of the most recognizable women in the country. When the war began, her fame became influence, and influence became leverage. She went to Stalin himself and made a request that would change the war. Let women fight in the air, not as nurses, not as support staff, but as combat pilots. Thousands of young women answered her call. Nurses, students, factory workers, athletes. Some had flown before. Many hadn't. The average age was 19. They trained in the freezing Russian winter, wearing men's uniforms that were too large, boots stuffed with rags, and flight goggles that fogged with every breath. Their training was short, brutal, and unforgiving. The war did not wait. From these ranks, a new regiment was formed. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, 100% women pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers, a full combat unit, something no other nation in World War II would create. The aircraft assigned to the unit was the Polikarpov Po-2, a plane never meant for combat. It was made of wooden frame, canvas skin, open cockpit. The wind cut through the pilot's coat at high altitude. In the winter, frostbite was not a possibility. It was a certainty. The plane's maximum speed was so low that most German fighters stalled if they tried to fly slow enough to engage one. This was not a warplane, it was a training aircraft, a crop duster, a machine built to take students on their first gentle flights. But war cares nothing for what is ideal. The women modified the Po-2 to carry 2 small bombs under each wing. No bomb bay, no armor, no radio, no parachute early in the war. They could not afford the weight. If the plane was hit, it burned. If the engine failed, it fell. If the mission failed, it was done again, and again, and again, every night. The Po-2 had one unexpected advantage. It could fly almost silently. The women of the 588th developed a tactic that would become legendary. They would fly high toward the target in groups of 3. 2 planes would descend first, drawing German searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. The third pilot would cut the engine, turning the propeller into a windmill, and she would glide in silence through the darkness. No engine noise, no warning, only that soft sigh of the canvas wings cutting through the air. Then, from 300 meters or less, 2 bombs fell, a few seconds of terror, then the roar of ignition. And by the time the Germans fired back, the Night Witch was already gone, climbing back into the night sky. This was not just bravery. This was discipline. This was ritual. This was war fought with patience, fearlessness, and absolute precision. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment flew its first combat mission in June 1942, near the banks of the Don River, where German forces were pushing toward Stalingrad. The women were nervous, not because they feared death, though they did, but because they feared failure. They had trained to prove something larger than themselves, that a woman could fight, just as fiercely, just as skillfully, just as effectively as any man. On that night, the regiment launched in darkness, the air cold enough that breath turned to mist inside the cockpit. The engines sputtered, the wings creaked, and navigators leaned over open maps lit only by moonlight. There were no radar systems, no guided instruments, no radio communication, only altitude by feel, direction by the stars, and faith that their fellow pilots were somewhere in the darkness nearby. When the bombs fell, they were small, no more powerful than a mortar shell. But they were dropped precisely onto fuel depots, ammunition dumps, and supply roads. The explosions ignited German stores like lantern oil. When the pilots returned to base, they found ground crews waiting in silence. They could not celebrate. They could not cheer. They could not even speak, not until the count was complete. All aircraft, all pilots, all navigators returned. The women had announced themselves to history. The regiment operated under brutal conditions. They flew multiple missions per night, sometimes as many as 10 to 15 sorties, returning only long enough to refuel, patch bullet holes, replace burned wiring, load more bombs. Sleep came in fragments, 20 minutes in a chair, an hour in the dirt, face buried in a scarf to stay warm. There were no heated barracks, no proper washrooms, no privacy. Mechanics worked with numb fingers, often stripping parts from damaged aircraft to keep others flying. The Po-2 engine leaked oil constantly. The smell of gasoline and sweat became the smell of camp life. The women joked, "Perfume of the front." But some nights, the mechanic worked in tears. Because the plane she repaired that morning came back full of holes that evening, and the girl who flew it came back pale, shaken, hands trembling. Some did not come back at all. By late 1942, the Germans had realized they were being hunted. They responded with searchlights so powerful they cut across the clouds like white swords. When those beams found a Po-2, the night turned to day, and every gun on the ground opened fire. The women had one defense: dive immediately, not gently, not carefully, straight downward. The wooden wings shuddered, canvas tore. The control sticks vibrated violently. If the pilot hesitated, the plane burned. One pilot later said, "Your heartbeat and the engine blended. If one stopped, so did the other." Some nights, the Germans changed tactics. They waited silently in the dark, engines cold, until they heard the glide of canvas wings. Then they fired straight up. The women were flying so low that sometimes they could see German soldiers' faces illuminated by the fires on the ground. This was war reduced to its most primal exchange, one person in the air, one on the ground, seeing one another, and deciding who survived. As missions intensified, the regiment began to form legends of its own. Two names rose again and again in reports: Nadezhda Popova, pilot; Yevdokia Bershanskaya, regiment commander. Popova's plane was hit multiple times in a single night, once returning with 42 bullet holes in the fuselage. Her navigator counted them with her at dawn, both women too tired to speak, just staring at the damage. When asked why she volunteered for mission after mission, Popova answered, "I wanted revenge. The Germans took my home. They killed my brother. I had nothing to lose." Her anger did not burn like fire. It burned like coals, steady, controlled, enduring. Commander Bershanskaya, meanwhile, was the architect of the regiment's tactics, strict, unyielding, relentless in duty. She demanded precision from everyone: pilots, navigators, mechanics, because one error could mean 3 aircraft lost, not one. But those who served under her loved her. She never asked them to do anything she would not do herself. And she flew, night after night. To the Germans, these women were terror in the darkness. To each other, they were sisters. By early 1943, German units began reporting the night witches in official intelligence briefings. The reports described untraceable aircraft, silent bombing attacks, unpredictable night infiltration. They noted that no matter how many were shot down, more returned the next night. The Germans began offering Iron Cross medals to any pilot who shot one down. And still, the Po-2s came. Some pilots grew so terrified of the sound of canvas wings that they would shoot into the darkness at nothing. One German diary entry reads, "You do not hear them, you only feel death arrive." Another, "If hell has aircraft, it will be these." And finally, the line that gave them their eternal name: "They are not women, they are night witches." By late 1942, the war had shifted into a struggle not just for land, but for identity. The German advance had slowed, then stalled, then bogged down in brutal winter street fighting in Stalingrad. The city was a furnace of shattered concrete, brick dust, and frozen bodies. The Volga River choked with ice and wreckage. Both armies were exhausted, both were starving. But the Soviets had something the Germans did not. Night. The 588th was ordered closer to the front, dangerously close, within range of German artillery. The pilots could hear the bombardment while they slept, earth trembling beneath their cots. Their targets were no longer distant supply lines. They were now German strongpoints inside the city, sometimes just 2 to 3 kilometers from the Soviet trenches. The Po-2 biplane, slow, fragile, and impossibly light, became an instrument of surgical harassment. Night after night, the night witches struck German command posts, disrupted troop rotations, destroyed ammunition piles hidden in ruined factories, and denied frontline soldiers a single hour of peaceful sleep. One German officer wrote, "They do not let us rest. You close your eyes and you hear them. The whisper of their wings means death." The women flew through wind so strong it tore tears from their eyes, even behind goggles. Frost hardened around their mouths. Their hands bled from gripping frozen controls. Their planes were not built for winter, yet winter became their ally. German planes refused to fly at night in the cold. The sky belonged to the night witches alone. One mission became legend. Pilot Nadezhda Popova, the same woman whose brother had been killed and whose home had been destroyed, flew 18 missions in a single night. Not 18 hours, not 18 days, 18 takeoffs, 18 bomb drops, 18 landings. Each flight load 2 bombs, fly low across the steppe, dodge tracer fire, glide silently, release, escape into the night, return to base, fuel, reload, go again. She later said, "We flew until there were no more bombs. Then we dropped metal scraps, engine parts, anything heavy. The point was not destruction. The point was fear." She returned the final time just before dawn, covered in soot and frost, shaking from exhaustion. She was 21 years old. This was the night the regiment's identity crystallized. They were not simply bombers. They were wielders of psychological warfare. They were not just damaging supply lines. They were breaking the enemy's will to sleep. And in war, sleep is strategy. By 1943, the Germans had adapted. They began deploying night fighter interceptors, Bf-109s and Ju-88s, equipped with spotlights, radar, and tracer belts. These aircraft were faster, stronger, built for combat. If they saw a Po-2, the Night Witch was dead, but seeing one was the problem. The Po-2 flew too low for radar to track, too slow for German fighters to pursue without stalling, too quiet to spot until it was already overhead. Still, one German ace, Joseph Kochuk, became a specialist in hunting them. He shot down several Night Witch crews in a single week. The regiment felt the loss deeply. They had been together for years now. They celebrated birthdays in the snow, shared blankets when fuel ran low, buried their dead at dawn, because that was the only hour they could spare. Every loss was a sister buried. So one night, while Kochuk climbed high to search for them, the Night Witches changed tactics. They flew lower. So low the plane's wheels brushed tree branches, so low the navigator could see the whites of German soldiers' eyes in firelight. Kochuk overshot their altitude entirely, searching the sky while the danger was below his wings. He never saw them. That night, they destroyed 3 German gun emplacements supplying his airfield. It was not revenge. It was strategy, but it felt like justice. War stories often glorify courage, but courage has a cost. Some nights, a plane simply didn't return. A Po-2 shot down didn't explode like a fighter plane. It fell quietly like a broken leaf, sometimes burning, sometimes only crumpled. Mechanics waited on the runway, scars of oil on their cheeks, counting landing lights. 1 light, 2, 3, then darkness. "No more," someone would whisper. They didn't cry then. There was fuel to pump, a replacement plane to prepare, targets to confirm, coordinates to memorize. The crying came later. A pilot wrote, "We did not mourn during the night. The night was for flying. The night was for the dead. Funerals were short, improvised. A cross carved from scrap wood. A flight scarf tied like a banner. A final salute from hands so cold they shook, then engines started again. Because grief could wait, but the war could not. By late 1943, the Night Witches had flown thousands of sorties. Their precision had shaped Soviet advances across the Don River, the Caucasus foothills, the skies over Kuban, and the path toward Crimea. They earned the Order of the Red Banner, one of the Soviet Union's highest military honors. Even the Germans now spoke of them with respect, though laced with fear. Captured German soldiers confessed under interrogation. "We began to dread the night. They made darkness our enemy," one German colonel wrote. "Give us anything. Give us cold. Give us hunger. But do not give us the Night Witches. Fear is a weapon, and the Night Witches wielded it with precision." By 1944, the German army was in retreat, but retreat did not mean surrender. It meant careful, fortified withdrawal, backed by artillery, minefields, and scorched earth. The Night Witches followed the front line south, into Crimea, where cliffs and salt winds met open steppe. Their new airfields were little more than fields of crushed dirt, marked only by tire tracks and burned grass. Some were so close to the front that pilots could see artillery flashes while preparing for takeoff. There was no luxury of distance now, no deep safety behind the lines. If the Germans attacked, they attacked directly into the airfield. The women slept in trenches. They ate whatever could be cooked quickly before missions, sometimes only bread, sometimes only boiled grain, sometimes nothing, and still they flew. Their targets were now ports, rail yards, retreat routes, German ferries crossing the Black Sea. They were no longer harassing the enemy. They were hunting him, and the Germans knew it. In April 1944, the regiment received orders to strike a heavily fortified ammunition depot near the coast. The target was protected by dense anti-aircraft batteries and overlapping searchlight grids. It was the most dangerous mission they had yet attempted. Pilots prepared in silence. Some checked their plane twice. Some tightened their scarves and gloves with slow, careful movement. Some simply looked at the horizon and breathed. They took off in formations of 3. As the first group approached, the sky ignited. Searchlights found them instantly. Tracer rounds rose like burning ropes. The women dived sharply, splitting formation, each pursuing her own glide path. One plane was struck in the wing. The canvas caught fire. Flames spread across the frame. The pilot, Irina Sabrova, ordered her navigator to jump, but her navigator refused. They stayed together. They aimed the flaming aircraft directly into the ammunition depot. The explosion shook the earth for kilometers. German guards were thrown to the ground. Windows shattered 50 miles away. No one saw the plane again. When word reached the regiment, no speeches were made. But every pilot walked to her aircraft that night, with their shoulders set, eyes forward, because grief was not the enemy. Stopping meant surrender. The German nickname Night Witches spread far beyond the front lines. It entered field reports, command briefings, prisoner interrogations, letters home. The Soviets did not choose this name. They did not advertise it. They did not engrave it on banners or medals. The name came from the men who feared them, and so the regiment adopted it quietly, not as pride, but as a fact of war. If the enemy calls you a witch, then you have done your work well. The women joked about broomsticks. They laughed about flying sewing machines, but they were not unaware of the meaning. They knew why the Germans feared that sound. The whisper of canvas wings was the promise of death. As the Red Army pushed west, the Night Witches entered territory the Germans had held for years. Villages burned, homes fallen to ash, families gone, churches shelled into skeletons of stone. Some pilots recognized towns from maps of their childhood. Some found the remains of homes they once lived in. Some found nothing. Pilot Nadezhda Popova, after the liberation of her village, wrote in her diary, "I walked where my house had been. There was only the foundation. I stood in silence. Then I went back to the plane. We flew that night as always." The war had taken much from them, but it had also forged them into something unbreakable. They were no longer girls who had enlisted in 1941. They were veterans, war-hardened, disciplined, respected by generals, and feared by an army that once believed women were incapable of war. By 1945, Germany was collapsing. Rail lines failed, fuel reserves dried, cities burned under artillery bombardment. Yet the Night Witches continued flying, even as the end became inevitable. Their final missions targeted retreating supply columns, ammunition reserve dumps, road convoys fleeing toward Berlin. They did not fly for medals. They did not fly for glory. They flew because those still alive needed them to. One pilot said, "When a war has taken everything from you, there is nothing left to fear." And that was the truth of the night witches. Not fearlessness, but the loss of everything except purpose. On May 8, 1945, Berlin surrendered. The war in Europe was over. That night, for the first time in nearly 1,000 consecutive nights, the sky was quiet. No engines, no bombs, no flames. Silence. The women of the 588th stood beside their planes, waiting for orders. There were none. Some laughed, some cried, most simply sat down on the ground. The night felt unnatural without the war. Their commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, recorded a single line in the final logbook. "Missions completed. The night is ours again."